Swinburne University of Technology.
In week 7, we look at legislation, policies and procedures as it relates to Swinburne University, and we have invited Anthony Gartner to unpack some of those issues and provide some support where we find more information about it for you as educators and also to help your students. Anthony, welcome.
Thank you, Varvara.
Can you please tell us what your role is here at Swinburne? Who are you and what you do?
Okay, so I'm the manager of the Student Equity and Disability Service, and that sits within Student Services.
So that's quite specific. This unit is much more broad. We look at diversity and inclusion. And having said that, how does the university define diversity and inclusion?
It's not specifically defined in one place, but it's a general sense that diversity is about in making sure that our practices and our policies and procedures are inclusive of groups that may traditionally have been marginalised from education.
Thank you. What kind of statistics do universities collect in terms of the diversity?
Unis are pretty good at collecting stats, so we've got information on everything really. It's all available on the statistics website, but so we would have gender, age, socioeconomic status, whether a student has a disability or not. All of those things are kept and available on the website.
So if somebody was particularly interested to look at the number of Indigenous people, for example, or disability, the number of disability students or ethnic, they would be able to access all of that information?
They could be found, yes.
Yeah?
Sometimes they may not be published, but they can be accessed, so it would be
So
sometimes
for research purposes, if they wanted to look more into, you know, comparing groups of students in terms of achievement, that kind of
information can be found by liaising with the stats unit.
Oh,
yes.
That's great.
Yeah.
So in terms of your role now, what exactly do you do in terms of the disability and access?
Okay, so I have a team of 2.8 disability liaison officers. So they work directly with students across all 5 teaching divisions of the university. So that's higher ed, vocational education, Swinburne Online, OUA, Swinburne College. The disability liaison officers meet with individual students who require some form of adjustment to enable their participation.
Okay.
It's about 700 students across the university that are registered with us for support.
And how do you know that 700? What happens when they enrol? Is there, how do you, because there might be students that we may not know about. How do you know about the 700?
That's often the case because disclosure is voluntary. A student is under no requirement to disclose. It's often in their interests to do so, but they also are entitled to confidentiality. So when a student enrolls at the university, there are specific questions on the enrolment form relating to disability, pardon me, and that will ask the student, do you have a disability? Which broad category does it fit into? So is it, for instance, physical, mental health, medical? There's about half a dozen categories, and it will ask them that, and it will ask them, will they require some kind of adjustments or support to enable their study? So students can choose not to disclose at that point, or they may disclose. We get then a list in disability services of all of the students who have disclosed, and we send an email to those students just advising them of the disability services unit and inviting them to register if they feel that they need some additional adjustments or support with us.
Excellent. So what are some of the policies and procedures that our educators need to be aware of, and where can they find that information?
Okay. From a disability perspective, the primary policy is in fact legislative. It's the Disability Standards for Education Act. That's Commonwealth legislation that requires an educational institution to make and negotiate reasonable adjustments with a student to ensure that they can participate in education to the same level as any other student. And that needs us to negotiate on a case-by-case basis with each student, and we need documentation from the students treating health professional, whether that be a GP or a psychologist or an educational psychologist or whoever the student's working with.
So there is legislation, there are acts.
Yes.
I recall recently reading about the Reconciliation Act. What's that all about? Can you please explain?
Yeah, so the Reconciliation Action Plan was launched just last month, and that is actually quite an achievement for Swinburne. It's something that I'm proud on behalf of Swinburne. It's a wonderful thing. The Reconciliation Action Plan is auspiced by Reconciliation Australia, and the intention of the plan is to ensure that Swinburne does what is necessary to enable access and participation by members of the Indigenous community.
That's fabulous. It's the current legislation too in terms of government and wanting to close the gap. Fabulous to have that here at Swinburne.
Yeah.
Are there any other policies that positively discriminate against a particular group that the university has?
Yeah, we have a disability action plan in place in the university that first was negotiated in 2003. And we're in the process of completely reworking that into an accessibility action plan. So we are engaged with Australian Network on Disabilities, who's one of the peak member organisations for disability in Australia, to rewrite the accessibility action plan and undertake a consultation process to do that. And that will ensure that there are measurable and accountable actions for the university to take, and reporting processes that ensure that we do what is required to enable the access and participation of people with disabilities, with long-term or chronic medical conditions. People who have caring responsibilities can also be incorporated into that. I'd like to incorporate issues for Indigenous community members into the Accessibility Action Plan. And also we're looking at the needs of students who are experiencing family violence and what we can do for those students as well.
There are definitely the issues that are talked a lot about in the media currently. What about, I think I remember reading somewhere there's a special policy for elite athletes. What's that all about?
I don't have a lot to do with that, but that's a policy that enables elite athletes access to flexible assessment arrangements so that they can honour both their education needs but also their professional sporting commitments.
Okay. In terms of, well, through this unit, we're really trying to encourage our participants to be very inclusive so there are no complaints. But in the unfortunate manner that a complaint occurs, how do you address that complaint, and where do our educators can go for support? Okay.
So students all have access to the online complaint process, and a student can submit a complaint. That complaint then goes through to a central database and then is sent to the appropriate feedback advisor, whose role it is then to investigate the complaint and provide a response to the student within 21 working days. And students then have an appeal process available to them, and ultimately they can take a complaint to the Human Rights Commission if they feel that the complaint has not been addressed by the university.
So complaints are taken very seriously and addressed in detail to ensure that the university does not get ridiculed in the human we don't want that. Yeah. We don't want that to happen. So anybody that has problems in the classroom could perhaps give you a call and to give advice, or go online and find those policies and procedures.
There's certainly lots of policies and procedures available online. I'm happy to provide advice to people if it's my particular focus is on equity-related complaints. So that would be issues like sexual harassment or discrimination or bullying. They're the ones where I tend to provide advice.
It's good to know. Is there anything else that you would like to share with the participants in terms of where to get information?
Most of the information is on the web, so there's a whole site for disability services on the web, and we have, for instance, information sheets about working with people who have various kinds of disabilities and how best to support those students. I think the bottom line is about just asking the student, what do you need?
Absolutely. We will include some of those links
Yes.
in the transcript that we will attach to this week. So Anthony, thank you very much for joining us today. We could continue this conversation for hours, however time is limited, and we appreciate your time and effort to address some of the questions that we've discussed.
Thank you, Varvara.
This has been a Swinburne production.